This is Kathy from Gadget321, and in today's video I'm going to be testing 3 Oysters Peacock Blue. This is the first 3 Oysters ink that I've tested, and it looks like a nice one. I'll be doing a writing sample on Tomoe River paper with a variety of pens and nib sizes ranging from a Pilot Extra Fine to a 1.5 stub nib. I'll compare this writing sample to a writing sample that I did previously on copy paper. I'm going to compare Peacock Blue to a few other blue inks that I have in my collection, and we'll take a look at the results of my water resistance test. The first writing sample was done with my glass dip pen, and the ink came off the nib very uniformly. That's always a good sign, and I'm seeing a wide range from dark to light, so I think I've got some potential for nice shading. This ink swatch I did with a pair of tweezers pinched together and dipped in the ink. I'm going to begin with my Pilot 78G with a stainless steel extra fine nib. This feels really nice, especially for an extra fine nib, and the legibility is very good. Decently wet, so very nice. Next is a Pilot Pereira with a fine stainless steel nib. And it may feel a little bit smoother than the extra fine, but not significantly. But I really like the legibility, the width of the line that it's putting down. Yeah, it's not a whole lot wetter, but it is a nice nib to use with this ink. Next, I've got a Faber Castell Ambition. This is the flamingo finish, or the flamingo material, and I think it makes a nice pair with this Peacock Blue. Again, not significantly smoother. You can tell it's putting down a little more ink. It's a wider line, but so there's a little feedback, but not uncomfortable at all. Not really worth noting. Yeah, you can see it's quite a bit wetter. You can hear the sound of the nib on paper, but very pleasant to write with. Next, I've got my Pilot Custom 74 with a 14 karat fine nib. Again, I can feel some feedback on the paper, not glassy smooth, but I'm seeing a little bit of shading, and that's common with this nib. Quite a bit wetter though. And I might even say this nib tends to be drier on the upstroke, so I don't know. It's starting to look in some places like it's a little too wet, like it's putting down a lot of ink in some places and not enough in others. I like the line that the Faber Castell is putting down a little better. It looks more uniform. With some inks, I don't mind the line variation that I get with the Custom 74, but I'm not as fond of it with this ink. Next, I've got my Sailor LeCool with a stainless steel medium fine nib. This pen feels like it's writing a little drier. I'm feeling more feedback to the point that for me it's a little uncomfortable. I'm gonna make a note. Notable feedback. It's not scratchy, but just, oh, like you're, I don't know, you're really having to work to get across the page. Next, I've got my Platinum 3776 with a 14 karat medium nib. I like the look of this ink as a work ink. It's blue, but there's just a little something different to it. It's got just a hint of green in it to make it look different. It doesn't look green. You don't look at it and say, oh, there's green in that ink. It's not too turquoisey. It's more, oh, more of a, just a brighter blue. I'll think of more of a denim blue. I think it's like a denim blue. And this 3776 has feedback with most inks, but it's a very pleasant feedback. And so I like it with this ink. This seems to be, I don't know, it feels like a wet ink, but it's so wet that you're feeling the nib on the paper. Next, I've got my Kaweco Perkeo all black with a stainless steel medium nib. Again, I'm feeling the feedback, but it's pleasant, as usual with this nib. I'm not getting anything that I'm able to say, yep, this feels smooth. They all have feedback, but it's not unpleasant except for the Sailor LeCool. Next, I've got my Pilot Pluminix with a cursive medium nib. Now this feels smooth. If I can fit it on here. And I like the way the ink looks in this nib. Next is my Kaweco Lilliput with the double broad nib. That is so smooth. I am curious to see if I will ever find an ink that does not feel smooth in that nib. And finally, I've got my Jinhao X750 with a 1.5 stub nib. Very luxurious feeling in those larger nibs. Okay, while that dries, let's take a look at the copy paper. Now, I discovered that this latest sheet of copy paper is not 20-pound copy paper. It's a thicker copy paper, so I'll have to make sure I'm not going to use the rest of it. On the next ink, I'll get the actual really thin 20-pound because I've noticed my inks are doing really good about not bleeding through too bad, and that's because this is a thicker paper. This one, let's see, and the thinner nibs didn't bleed through too bad. You wouldn't be able to use both sides of the page, but one side didn't feel sloppy. And let's see, this ink doesn't seem to feather. The only nib that had any notable feathering was the double broad The stub maybe a little bit, the edges looked kind of ragged, but the others looked pretty good. Maybe I just didn't like the feel of the Custom 74. It was the only one that I thought, well, it feels a little too wet. And my Sailor LaCool, I was having trouble with it skipping. So, not major skipping like on the L, just a touch, and on that downstroke there. Just minor annoyances, but nothing that would make it unusable. And the Pluminix felt scratchy on the copy paper. That was strange. Felt very smooth on the Tomoe River. The inks from my collection that are similar to Three Oysters Peacock Blue, Yamadori. Let me see. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see this better. Yamadori had just a hint more green to it and tended to show a little more shading. Sailor Mano Kikyu is a little bit more blue, and I feel like it's maybe a little less saturated. Iroshizuku Tsukiyo is a little lighter, a little less saturated maybe, and it looks like from the scribble it might be a little bit wetter. I don't know. I think it's a little different type of blue. It's not quite as bright. Jacquerbon Blue Plenitude looks like it has a little more green in it, and it looks a little wetter if you look at the scribble, and the way it came off the dip pen nib was a little sloppier. Califolio Equinox is maybe a little greener, and looks like it's going to shade a little more, have a little more shading, so it might be a little bit drier. And Ackerman Israel Zablau is also a little greener and maybe a little drier and shades a little more. But all of those were very similar to Peacock Blue. And my water resistance test, I was kind of surprised. There's a lot of like a greenish gray that stays behind. That was kind of a surprise. And I love how the ink swatch turned out on Tomoe River paper. It's a little bit wetter, I think, and the only place that even came close to bleeding through was on the wettest part of the swatch. Everything else did fine. You just have the normal show through. I'm seeing up here on the heaviest part just that tiniest bit of sheen, and I'm seeing some shading on the platinum. I really like the way that looks. The Kaweco has some nice shading, and the Pluminix does. I like just the tiny bit of shading in this ink. It's a nice work ink that just has a little bit of extra interest to it. Alright, if you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.